This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the newest edition in the Compliance Podcast Network, my latest podcast, Compliance and Coronavirus. As the voice of compliance, I wanted to start a podcast which will help bring both clarity and sanity to the field of compliance, the compliance practitioner, and indeed the compliance profession during this worldwide health and healthcare crisis. Taking up a variety of topics as diverse as working from home to sporting events, to the role of the board of directors, to crisis management, to the role of supply chains. We will look at all of these in this podcast. If you have a topic you'd like covered on compliance and coronavirus, please let me know. I'd be happy to do a podcast on it. In this episode, I visit with E.J. Marin of Nikesia, and we take a look at the issue of organizational design in the age of coronavirus. So as a compliance practitioner, what's the design of your compliance function? Does it need to change? And are there new risks associated with any change in organizational design? Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I have with me Melissa Koch, and she is a co-founder of InFront Compliance. So Melissa, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
So, Melissa, I was wondering, you've been on another podcast called Innovation in Compliance, but this is your first appearance on compliance and coronavirus. So could you introduce yourself, your role at InFront Compliance to our audience?
I'm Melissa Koch. I am the co-founder and CEO of InFront Compliance. We provide compliance solutions for heavily regulated industries, especially in financial services and cybersecurity. We provide a platform that breaks down very complex compliance topics and breaks it down into assessments and easy-to-read reports to manage compliance in a whole new way.
Melissa, I began this podcast in mid-March because I wanted to bring some clear and sane information to the business executive, and the questions I had and answers about what people were asking back then have changed. So I was wondering, as we record this in late September 2020, what are the top 2 or 3 issues that you and your team at InFront Compliance are, if not facing, being asked by your customer base?
Certainly. So we have seen a lot change. And I think that the biggest one that what we talk about and that we get asked about is how to manage return to work, because that's going to look a lot different for a lot of organizations. And it already has. So for organizations that are managing remote and see remote as at least a partially permanent solution for their operations, it's a matter of making sure that their remote work is secure. We've seen a real uptick in the intelligence across our organizations that we work with, and being much smarter about who they work with, not only from a third-party vendor, but also having insight into fourth, fifth-party vendor, and then internally making sure that they have the operational processes in place to mitigate potential risk and compliance infractions when they're working through systems and automated and computer systems. So it's a different world now. And I think people have really started to internalize that and accept that we're going to work differently for the foreseeable future.
Melissa, one of my observations through this period has been that trends that may have been that started in 2018 or 19 or were percolating along in 2018 or 19 accelerated in many ways exponentially during COVID-19. And you mentioned not only third parties, but fourth and fifth third parties. And that was certainly a trend that we had seen in that time frame. But now we have people paying real attention to that for a variety of reasons, for compliance reasons, cyber reasons, and others. Would that be a fair assessment from your perspective?
Absolutely. It's a completely fair assessment. And that's what I meant by we're seeing a kind of an uptick in intelligence around this, and people being a lot smarter, organizations being a lot smarter, and realizing that they don't want to undermine their entire compliance program with fourth and fifth party liability, even if they've been super diligent on the third party risk. And we see this a lot with organizations that are procuring software products and services through intermediaries like resellers, for example, and trying to make sure they close gaps, not only with the resellers directly, but with the actual third-party provider of the products, and how to qualify them in a way that it remains true to your overall compliance program.
Regulated industries that you play in, FinTech and other non-commercial industries, have an additional layer of compliance regulation around retention of information, retention of recorded phone calls, of chats, Is that something your customer base has been able to come up with a solution, or have you been able to help them come up with a solution in the working from home environment?
Sure. So, the answer relative to us is yes. I mean, so we do collect that information. We collect artifacts. We store it in a way that makes it more accessible and understandable. And we are kind of one of a number of solutions out there, in terms of being able to meet your regulatory requirements by way of artifact collection and document collection and retention. There are solutions out there. But for us, again, the key is making sure you know how that relates to a particular requirement and be able to call on that when you need it, whether that's a regulator who comes calling or you have investigative purposes that you need to call on it. So making sure you have systems that support you in this environment, because again, you're not necessarily going to kind of a common records room anymore. Everything is digital and kind of needs to be. And so making sure you have the platforms that support you in maintaining that information, giving you access to that information, and helping you make decisions around that information. So it's there the way that you need it becomes critically important.
Melissa, one of your customer bases is government contractors. And in speaking with several people in that arena, they have talked about how the government has really, I don't want to say woken up, but certainly emphasized cybersecurity and the supply chain all the way down. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Oh, completely. And the Department of Defense is leading the charge with the CMMC, the new cybersecurity maturity model certification protocol. So what we're seeing on that front is there is a huge sensitivity around the importance of cybersecurity when it comes to acquisitions. So if you are a vendor, especially if you're a vendor in the defense industrial base or the DIB for the Department of Defense, this is a requirement for you, but it's not limited to the Department of Defense. We're seeing it across other agencies as well. And it is anticipated that a lot of the methodologies and a lot of the approaches that are embodied in the CMMC model will get rolled out to other agencies so that you can drive consistency throughout the government regulatory requirements and be able to have a much more secure supply chain.
Melissa, I used to ask a question that was something along the lines of, where do you see us being in Q3 and Q4? And unfortunately, now I ask, where do you see us being in 12 to 18, perhaps even 24 months in the FinTech compliance space? Are you having those types of conversations with your clients now?
We are, because again, I think this way of doing work and being remote and interacting with your clients differently is something that is here to stay. I mean, some of us have been comfortable in the remote work world for a while, but when things like events have really transformed, you're not going to go to a physical trade show for the foreseeable future. So interacting at some of these conferences or interacting at some of these other live events just looks different now. And so being able again to take a longer view and really settle into a more digital way of interacting and finding ways to make it meaningful when you're meeting new people, you're networking with new potential opportunities. Again, having the platforms that support you and being able to operate in this world, it's definitely something that's different for a lot of organizations, but it's something that we're seeing organizations adapt to.
Melissa, one of the great things I find about InFront Compliance is the resources that you guys make available on your website that I certainly take advantage of. And you had one blog post that really intrigued me, a little bit different than our focus today, but I couldn't resist the chance to visit with you about the DFS enforcement action against First American Title. Mm-hmm. And your title, I thought provocatively said, Financial Institutions Rattled by DFS Entry into Cybersecurity Enforcement. And I was wondering if just you could explain a little bit about why they're rattled and how you can help them maybe become unrattled.
Sure. Well, I mean, so what we're seeing when you reference them for people who don't go by just the initials, it's the New York State Department of Financial Services cyber regulations, and it's New York State's way of saying that cybersecurity is really important and publishing regulatorily what the requirements are for the organizations that operate in that space. And we're seeing an uptick in that generally. We're seeing a lot of the states get a lot more rigorous and a lot lot smarter about how to think about cybersecurity requirements to protect the information that's flowing, and to make sure that everybody understand what's important and why it's important. So with New York State DFS cyber requirements, and the recent case, it really is an important news event for organizations who are in the financial services world, and almost everyone has a touch point to New York being such a banking center and a financial services center. So taking note of what the cyber requirements are, making sure you operationalize them in your organization, only helps you be prepared to do business in the sector. And we work with FinTechs, and we talk to FinTechs regularly, and making sure that you're proactive specifically in this particular space could give you a competitive advantage against other competing FinTechs who aren't ready to do business under the cybersecurity requirements published by the New York State Department of Financial Services.
Melissa, one of the things that intrigued me about the enforcement action was that it was against an insurance company. Mm-hmm. And that's a regulated industry by the DFS. Mm-hmm. Are you having those kinds of conversations with insurers? Have they awakened now to their potential exposure?
I do think so. And again, I think that's another huge takeaway here is that these enforcement actions and who really needs to be smart about these regulations isn't just limited to financial institutions themselves. The insurers do get brought in, and the insurers are getting smarter because they can see and spot, or hopefully they're getting smarter about seeing and spotting where the potential risk areas are so that they can identify the gaps, advise, and close them.
Melissa, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted more information on InFront Compliance, where could they go?
Certainly. So please check us out on the web at www.infrontcompliance.com. That's all one word, INFRONTCOMPLIANCE.com. Or if you have questions for me specifically, you can reach me at melissa@infrontcompliance.com.
Melissa, as we move into Q1 and Q2 of 2021 and perhaps beyond, I hope that I might be able to call upon you for some guidance on where we may be at that point in time.
Anytime, Tom. It's always a pleasure to visit with you.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance and Coronavirus. This is the only B2B podcast which brings clear and sane information for both the compliance professional and a business executive. If I could ask you to do one thing, if you could tell one person about this podcast, I'm trying to get the word out about this most unique podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network. So if you could tell one person about it, send them a copy, send them a link, do something to help me publicize this podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. Compliance and Coronavirus is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network, and it appears Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode.